Massey.
Good morning and Shabbat Shalom and welcome. This is Valley Beth Shalom, Torah study for a Shabbos morning. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, joined every week by my dear friend and teacher, Rabbi Marc Gellman. Marc, it's good to see you. Shabbat
Yeah,
Shalom.
good Shabbos, Eddie. Good Shabbos.
I hope you've had a wonderful week with your
I
family.
have. I have
It's
children
terrific.
visiting me in Florida. Just want you to know, when we were in LA, no one went to visit us. Now we're in
Oh,
southern Florida in the winter. Everyone, my brother, everybody,
everyone
hey,
comes.
hey, we'll come and see you there. It just shows you it's the weather. It's not you. It's not the love you give your kids. It's the weather.
It's the weather.
Yeah.
Well, this morning we are going to read a remarkable Torah portion. This
Yeah.
is the fourth Torah portion in the book of Exodus called Bashalach. It is the denouement, the climax, the conclusion of the great Exodus story. We left off last week just at the verge of the 10th plague. The 10th plague comes and Pharaoh says, "Leave my land." And we think, well, that's the end of the story. The people are going to go. And they pick up their things. And because the story is told again that because they were in a rush, they didn't have time to let the bread rise, and they run into the wilderness. This remarkable scene of thousands of people who have been kept in captivity as slaves running into the wilderness. And they go 3 days into the wilderness and they stop at the banks of the Red Sea and they think that they are free. And they breathe, beginning to breathe as free people. And of course, the story, as we all know, because this is the greatest moment, the most cinematic moment in all of the Bible, Pharaoh changes his mind one more time. His heart is hardened. He realizes what he's done, that he's been humiliated by a nation of slaves. And so he gathers his chariots and his armies, and he goes to pursue them to the sea. And the people of Israel catch sight of Pharaoh and they begin to scream. And it's wonderful. The wonderful thing about this, and this is when Jews are in trouble, there's always time for a kvetch. I mean, it's true that there's imminent death closing in on us from behind. And the people of Israel become incredibly articulate. They say to Moses, "Was it because there weren't enough graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in the wilderness?"
Great line.
It's a great line. And the cynicism of that line, isn't this just what we told you would happen? What happened to the freedom? And it's clear that's a foreshadowing of something that's about to happen. But before it happens, we have a drama. And the drama is Moses says, "Watch." And then he turns to God and says, "What do I do?" And God says, "Sa, move." There's a time to pray and there's a time to move. And he tells him, "Hold your arm across the sea." And he holds his arm across the sea and the sea splits. You have certainly seen the movie if you didn't read the book. And the people of Israel cross with the waters as a wall on both sides. And they come to the other side and Pharaoh chases them into the waters. And then Moses extends his arm again and the waters fall down upon the Pharaoh. And at that moment, everything becomes crystal clear. At that moment, all the fog lifts. At that moment, the uncertainty is gone. At that moment, we know that there is a God who rules history. At that moment, we know that might does not make right. Right can have its own might. At that moment, history takes on its own contours, its own shape. And the people Israel sing in song for the first time, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, there's nobody like God. And that's the story. And it's such a great story. And we tell it every year at the Passover, just before we sing Dayenu. But what's so interesting, because the Torah is a book of such wisdom, is what happens next, because that would be the story. If you ended the book there, it would be a triumph, a story of the triumph of God in history, a plea to us to have faith that somehow we will cross the sea in our own time and find our way to freedom on the other side. But 3 days later, the people of Israel begin their march into the desert. And they begin complaining again. Now, these are not ordinary people. These are people who saw the cruelty of Pharaoh's slavery. These are people who saw their children thrown into the Nile. These are people who witnessed the 10 plagues. These are people who ran out of Egypt. These are people who crossed the sea. These are people who saw the Pharaoh vanquished. And yet, because there's no water, because there's no food, they begin to kvetch bitterly. They kvetch, and Moses can't take it. And he complains to God, what am I doing with this people? And God gives him an instruction. And the instruction is, tell the people that there'll be manna falling from heaven. And this is, go out every morning and collect as much as you need. Don't keep it overnight. It won't keep. There's no tin foil. There's no refrigerators. And on Friday, there'll be a double portion. That's why you have a double challah on your Friday night table. And on Shabbos morning, there'll be no manna, so don't go looking for it. And of course, Shabbos morning comes and people go out looking for it. And God says to Moses, such an interesting line, ad matai ma'antem. How long is it going to take to change the heart of this people? And so the contrast between the beginning of the Torah portion, where God splits a sea and destroys the Pharaoh once and for all, and the end of the Torah portion, where God cannot change the heart of an enslaved people, where it's easier to get the people out of Egypt than to get the Egypt out of the people. That contrast is so stark and so difficult. You want to sing and dance at the beginning of the Torah portion. You want to cry and kvetch at the end of the Torah portion. And, we've lived both realities. You've seen moments of redemption in the world. State of Israel exists. We've seen moments of redemption. America exists. We've seen moments of redemption. And yet, the daily reality of the daily newspaper is ad matai. How long is it going to take for people to finally learn what we're required to do? And just one last thought. It occurs to me that what you have in that contrast are two different temperaments about how the world changes. There's an apocalyptic temperament and an ameliorist temperament. The apocalyptic temperament is that one, that revolutionary who proclaims that it takes one big bang and we change everything, right? All we need to do is, is remove the chains of slavery and we will all be free. That one big bang revolutionary who says power to the people, power to the working class, power to one big bang to change history. And then there's the other voice. And the other voice says, I respect your desire to change. I really do. But you've got to know something about the human material out of which you want to make a new society. And that human material doesn't change that quickly. There is no single big bang, single moment that is going to change the nature of human beings and their pattern of responses and the way they are in the world. That is a long, slow slog across a vast and dangerous wilderness. And that's going to be the story of the Torah going forward. And that conversation between the two, sometimes a conversation between generations, right? When we were young, we were all revolutionaries. And as we get old, become ameliorists, small steps, slow change, step by step, conserve things that matter, right? A conservative temperament as opposed to a radical temperament. That, I think, is the contrast that the Torah portion presents. So, Marc Gellman,
Yes.
were you a youthful revolutionary?
I was. My my essay, I was accepted at HUC by Nelson Glick personally, but he said, "Look, let's get your paperwork going. You got to fill out some things. You have to do an essay. You're already admitted, but do an essay for me." And I started the essay when Che Guevara enters a village. That's how I began my essay. Oh my God, I was active in SDS and anti-war stuff, and oh my God, and it was really this Big Bang idea that somehow we could change everything and change the country from a military industrial complex and changed the way we thought about things. And it took me years and years and years to live through that and into my religious life and into my understanding that people have an ambivalent notion about the greatest gift God ever gave us, which is freedom. God gave us freedom of the will. But in receiving the gift, we only partially wanted it. There's something alluring about slavery. There's something alluring about, having the government take care of you, or sitting on your couch and watching TV and having a check come in, or, people living with your parents rather than trying as hard as you can to start a career and a life. There's something in us that wants to crawl back into Eden, back into the womb. And then there's a part of us that wants to be free and wants to find our own destiny. And it's that conflict that constitutes our life, that that struggle between wanting to be free and really not wanting to be free. Erich Fromm wrote about it. And there's really only psychological ways of seeing that. And then I got into Midrash, and it helped me to explain this ambivalence about freedom. And one of the things I learned is that Shmuel Bar Nachmani wrote in Barachot 55a, in Marin lo Ladam Ela Mahar Hare Libo, we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. That is such a profound insight. We don't really see the world the way it is because we impose a sort of narrative. You speak about this brilliantly and often, about the narratives we live with, the stories that put together the facts of the world for us. So the rabbis ask, how is it possible that our people could fetch so quickly after the Red Sea? And in my favorite of all the lines of all the Midrashim and Shemot Rabbah, there's a thing. So how could they not, they ask, how could they not see the miracle? And they answer, some did not see the miracle because they never looked up. And so all they saw in the passage through the sea was mud. And that is us. Eddie, that's us. That's every one of us. Whether we are going through the Red Sea of struggle of this or that, of addictions or despair or betrayal or whatever narrowing place, whatever Egypt we're trying to get out of. The question is, can we look up? Or do we only look down at our misery and our enslavement? I sort of invented a technique for helping people in grief and counseling, and I call it spiritual balancing. What I would do, Ed, is I'd have people fetch to me about whatever it was they were having trouble with in their life for a certain period of time, small time, like 5 minutes. Say, for 5 minutes, I only want to hear you fetch. I only want to hear what's bad in your life and what's the problem. Good. And I would time it. Okay, done. Now for the next 5 minutes, I only want you to tell me what's good in your life, what's still good, what is still a blessing, what is still in your control. And you have to only do that for 5 minutes. And they do it. And at the end of the 10 minutes, I ask, well, how do you feel? And I'm telling you, it's like a miracle. They say, well, I feel better. I think I can see things in perspective a little more. And I learned this in 9/11, where I'm sitting in my house, like everyone was, looking at those pictures over and over and over again, the plane hitting the tower. And finally, I said, to Betty, I said, we got to turn this thing off. And for a certain amount of time that equals what I've been looking on TV, we're going to take a walk. We're going to go read a book. We're going to listen to music that we love. And then I'll come back to the TV. So I think in order to love freedom and act on it, we have to have the capacity to balance. And that's what television kills because of their principle. If it bleeds, it leads. You know, they bombard us with negative images because the people who track these things tell them, oh, that's what people watch. More people watch blood than watch stories of puppies. So I think that's the first thing. The second is I think the people are getting a bad rap. The kvetchers get a bad rap. The truth is that when the Soviet Union became, after the Russian Revolution, and people began to complain about Stalin's secret police and the rest, they had a legitimate complaint. It wasn't just that they were kvetching. What they saw was that part of this vision didn't work. And the people who are in the desert, who had just gone through the Red Sea, Ed, what are they complaining? They don't have water. We have the story of the waters of Meribah in Exodus 17. They say, look, we're out in the desert and we don't have any water. Well, that's a legitimate complaint. And Moses should understand, that's you have a great idea, freedom, good, freedom. But if you're dying of thirst, where's the water? Gandhi wrote a beautiful little epigram, to a starving man, God is bread. To a starving man, God is bread. So I want to just say a word about the kvetchers. They were dying of thirst in the desert, and they go to the guy who brought them through, and said, okay, we're free now, fine, okay, we'll deal with that. But we can't deal with that until we have something to eat and something to drink. And so God has Moses strike the rock, and it yields water. And then there's an interesting story we'll get to when we get to Numbers 20, which is the same place, Massah and Meribah. And there God says to Moses, speak to the rock, and it'll yield water. But Moses hits it, just like he did in Exodus 17. And then because of that, God says to Moses, you can't enter the land. Well, so we'll have to deal with whether that was too extreme. But those are my thoughts about it. That in fact, it's not just a sort of aging out of the big idea, Ed. It's that over time, we see flaws in the big idea. And the truth is there's a flaw in communism. And the flaw is it can't produce the goods and services people need. And it can't produce the freedom that people want. And that's not a kvetch. That's a critique.
Mm-hmm. I also think that there's to follow up on Fromm and the escape from freedom, there's a basic dialectic in human life between freedom and security.
Yes.
Right? To experience freedom is to know that the world is uncertain, that it's filled with possibilities, but there's no certainty going forward. And that's scary. That is a very frightening perspective. And security is the sense in which things are under my control. And there's a certain degree of certainty that is given to me. And the question is, can I live with the lack of control? Can I live with the uncertainty? And I think that we alternate back and forth. I think that we alternate back and forth to live with that, both a sense of adventure, a sense of openness, a sense of uncertainty, an open future that's not entirely determined, and on the other hand, a sense of security, that everything is under control. And I'll give you a silly example of this. If you go to visit a place you've never been, the difference between taking a guided tour with a guide who takes you here and there and takes you, knowing that everything is under control, he's leading us or she's leading us, and going off on your own and getting lost. I mean, Nina and I got lost in the streets of Paris, right? Just wandering around. And if you have the courage to get lost, sometimes the things that you find are the most remarkable things. To wander into a little church in Italy, in a little town, and discover beautiful art and remarkable music, even though it's literally off the beaten path. But you have to be ready for the uncertainty that you also may just end up in a terrible place, and that kind of balance. And what happens is these are people that are used to living a world of certainty, because while slavery is horrendous, it has one virtue. It has one virtue. It has complete and utter security. Your tomorrow is always going to be just like your yesterday, and there'll always be something to eat at the end of the day. And when you take away that, then your tomorrow is nothing like your yesterday. Even under the circumstances of becoming liberated, it becomes, there's a sense of insecurity. There's a fear that attaches itself to that. And that's a very difficult thing.
There is an attraction to Egypt. There's an attraction to slavery. That was true in the Civil War as well. When it was hard after the Civil War to get some of the slaves who now had freedom to leave the security of the plantation. And it took years for the African American community to understand and to teach what it also took years for us to understand, that God does not want us to live as slaves. Even though it's secure in some ways, it's not our destiny. Because ultimately, if you live without freedom, there's no difference between us and the animals. The different animals don't live without freedom, and they live lives that may be serene, they may be imperiled, but they don't have freedom. They have instincts, and they're driven by their instincts. And so I think the part of us, because we're partly animal and partly spiritual, those parts are constantly at war.
Yeah. Now, you've done a wonderful job defending the slaves. Let me go back and re-indict them for a moment.
All right.
All right. My parents were chalutzim in late 40s, early 50s. They went to Israel and built a kibbutz. And they were these young revolutionaries. And the kibbutz movement meant a great deal to my parents. There was a political fight on the kibbutz, and my parents were on the losing side. And that's how I ended up being born in America instead of being born in Israel. But we maintained a connection with kibbutz. And when I was old enough, I went to Israel and spent summers and spent time on that kibbutz. And the kibbutz was a revolutionary movement. People who were really prepared to give up private property.
Yep.
Everything was owned by everybody. I mean, I remember the first time I was working as a volunteer, and once a week we got to go to the Machsan. And the Machsan was this little store, and it had all kinds of things in it, including candy bars. And we asked the kibbutznik who was leading us, like, how many can we take? And she said, how many do you need?
Yeah.
I mean, the idea was you can have what it's the old Marxist idea that we take from each according to his abilities, and we give to each according to his needs. They gave us clothes, they gave us a place to sleep, they gave us food, they gave us fun. We had a moadon, we had a clubhouse with a television, and we had, and the idea here was that, you for some of us, you gave up the idea of the private property and you sort of found your way into the collective. And it's a whole different way of thinking. This is what kibbutz was about, to think about the collective and to think about my place as giving to the collective, as responsible for the collective. And then we began to see the kibbutz movement fall apart. I remember the first time I saw this, I was working with one of the kibbutzniks, and we passed the dining room. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. And there were a couple of kibbutzniks sitting in the dining room having a coffee break. And the guy I'm working with, who's schwitzing, is working hard, he says, can you imagine those bastards sitting there having a coffee break? There's so much work to be done. He began to see the collective ideal cracking. Some years later, I went back, I was visiting another kibbutz, and I was staying in the guest house of the kibbutz, and a guy was serving me dinner. And we're chatting, and he said to me, this isn't my job on the kibbutz. I do another job. I do this, I get extra money. I get extra allowance. No one gets paid, but you get an allowance. I said, you get a bonus for doing this work? He says, yeah, because, like no one else wanted to do it. So we started giving bonuses. See, that's when you've broken the collective.
Yeah.
If they had said to Moses, there's no water, what can we do to help you find some? That would have told you that they accepted responsibility for their own condition, their own fate, and they were willing to work to fix it. But they didn't say, there's no water, what can we do together to find some? They said, there's no water, what are you going to do to give us water?
Fair point. A fair point, but they've been free people for like 10 minutes.
Exactly right.
Give them a break.
And that collective attitude. Collective attitude. Look, during this pandemic, people were hoarding toilet paper.
But people
and there were signs in the and there were signs in the supermarket saying, if you take too much, there won't be enough for your neighbor. Right. And you saw both attitudes. You saw people that said, I can get my neighbor, I'm going to take as much as I can grab. But then there were others who said, you need it more than me, take a package. It's so interesting, the different attitude. Can you accept responsibility for the collective? That's the question.
My favorite kibbutz stories that reinforce that beautiful point. I remember going on kibbutz when I was living there and visited a far left Hashomer Tzayir kibbutz, and there was no flowers around the main house. And I asked them, why don't you decorate this with some flowers here? And they looked at me and says, because they said to me, you can't eat flowers. And that is exactly the moment when I understood why kibbutz would not survive. Because they didn't understand that people need potatoes and green beans and mishmish, they need apricots, but they also need flowers.
That's very true.
But on the other side, one time I'm visiting Israel with my congregation. It was before, actually, it was the trip that I heard about just before I came to the shul in 81. And one of the guys in the congregation made crayons. So he brought a whole bag full of boxed crayon sets, and he went to the Gan Yeladim, to the kindergarten, and spilled out all the crayon boxes on the table. So each of the are for each of you. And each child took a box of crayons, and they opened the box of crayons, and each of the kids poured their crayons into the center of the table. And that was the moment I knew that they would make different kinds of people there.
Wow.
These were people who were natural sharers. The kids so if you're using your red crayon, so maybe the other person can use a red crayon from someone else. And in our kindergarten, I did it once just for the heck of it. I put some big boxes of crayons, and you know what the kids did first? They put their name on the box.
Right. Mine.
And you notice that there's a huge percentage of kibbutzniks who are generals in the army, and who, because they have natural collective tendencies and talents, but for the kvetchers, the flower lovers, to the girl who was on kibbutz I met who wanted just to be a flautist. She just wanted to learn to be a flautist. And she said, they won't pay for me to be a flautist at the kibbutz. And so I'm just selling garlic here. And she needed to have a life where she could be a flautist, because that was her passion. And now you know the percentage of Israelis who live on kibbutz, which was never more than about 6 or 7 or 8%, is now way below 3%. And on the kibbutzim, as you noted, some of them are hiring labor, some of them are just factories. They have plastic factories, and they bring in local laborers. And you realize the utopian socialist model of the kibbutz, as well intentioned as it was, is simply not workable. Whereas entrepreneurial capitalism is workable, even with its problems of people being left out because they don't have skills that are valuable. So whatever choice you make in political economy, you have to deal with the other side.
Right. Yeah, it's workable. Entrepreneurial capitalism is workable. The question is, will it destroy the environment? Is
Right.
it because it's lacking that other voice, which is the collective voice, which is your actions are affecting us all, even if it doesn't register on your spreadsheets.
Right.
Your actions, you can't simply act for yourself. The market isn't wise enough to make certain decisions. I mean, this was Adam Smith about how the market is the invisible hand that governs us. But is the market wise enough to make the kind of decisions we need to make to heal a broken environment, to heal a broken social environment and a broken physical, natural environment? That's going to be the drama that we see going forward. So the question today that we've tried to wrestle with is the two parts of the Torah portion. The one which presents an apocalyptic utopian model of changing the world all at once. And the other which says, it's a lot more complicated, it's slower, it's more frustrating, because the human material out of which we create the utopia, that human material is deeply conflicted, it's deeply flawed, it's deeply complex, and has to be taken into consideration. And we'll see this conversation going forward as we go through the balance of the Torah. As we finish today, you all know that Rabbi Gellman is one of the great master of modern midrash. And he has a new book that he's putting together. And we're going to get a preview of that new book. This story is based on a simple phrase, right, from Parshat Truma. In Parshat Truma, which is coming up in a couple of weeks, Moses is going to be told by God, I want you to take contributions from the people of Israel to build a mishkan, to build a sanctuary, a shrine, a tabernacle here in the desert. And one of the things that he tells them to take are tchashim, dolphin skins. And the question of the Midrash is, dolphins in the middle of the desert? So Rabbi, give us the story.
When the children of Israel escaped from Egypt, and gosh, I wish you were there to see it, the happy dolphins of the Red Sea were waiting for the ancestors of you and me. They were splashing the blue water with their flat tails and jumping the waves like they had their own sails. They were so cute the children ran to try to get them into their arms so they could pet them. Suddenly, everyone heard the terrible sounds of horses' hooves pounding the dry ground. It was Pharaoh and his chariots of war bearing down on them and planning to hurt them some more. We're trapped, they snapped. If we go back, we will be slaves in Egypt's towns, and if we go forward, we will surely drown. Even Moses was caught in the middle. God, he cried, we are in one heck of a pickle. What am I supposed to do now with all the people, goats, and cows? And then, as amazing as this was to see, God just basically unzipped the Red Sea, leaving walls of water on both sides of a dry pathway. Moses pointed at the sea and yelled, let's go that way. The people and all their animals ran through the path faster than you could run away from cannibals. They were singing and dancing, and even the cows were prancing. This miracle at the sea was the answer to their deepest wish. There was only one problem. It freaked out the fish. A typical Red Sea fish would be swimming along, minding its own business, and maybe singing a song in fish, when suddenly it crossed through one of the walls of water and had a great scare when it found itself trying to swim in midair, which is nowhere if you're a fish. The dolphins tried to help their friends, the fish, by yelling a warning in their very best fish, don't go there, to which the fish responded, where? and the dolphins chirped, "There, in the air." But before the fish could turn around in a band, they found themselves flopping around on dry land. Fish flopping in the air was not the only problem that the dolphins had over there. Some sheep and some goats walked through the water wall and suddenly had to try to float. But God did not make sheep, goats, and cows to splash. God made them to sit in meadows eating grass. So the dolphins nudged the flocks back into the air and tried to keep the fish from growing there. The dolphins were so busy goading the goats and chewing the sheep and finding the fish that they did not even see the armies of Pharaoh were also entering the sea. Their huge war chariots had knives sticking out from their hubs, and every chariot was filled with spears, arrows, and clubs. To add to the dolphins' enormous task, the chariots were also moving really fast. The people cried out to Moses, "They overmatch us. In just a few minutes, they are bound to catch us." Moses was completely out of ideas and was getting ready to fail when suddenly he saw hundreds of dolphin sails. The dolphins used their flat tails to splash water on the Pharaoh's war wagons, which got so stuck in the mud they had to drag them. This made the Pharaoh curse and shout, and it gave time for the people to run right out and find some rest on the other bank, while Pharaoh's army quickly sank under the walls of water that suddenly disappeared, which was what his soldiers most deeply feared. God told the dolphins to swim away fast because the pathway of land was not meant to last. But the dolphins just kept helping their friends, and when they helped, they just swam back and helped again. Some of the dolphins got sucked down to the bottom where some spiky hubcaps landed on them. Many dolphins died just because they always tried to help, no matter how, whether it was a person, a fish, or a very lost cow. The next day, the people rose to see some dead dolphin bodies on the shore of the sea. God said to Moses, "Take their skins and make a tent of dolphins to cover the ark, which will keep it shaded when it's time to park. The tent will remind you, wherever you might be, that you would never have made it out of Egypt without a lot of help from the friendly dolphins of the Red Sea."
Oh, that's wonderful. What a wonderful story. The friendly dolphins of the Red Sea.
It's a part of a book where each Jewish holiday has a new rhyming midrash.
I love it. So, ladies and gentlemen, when you read the Torah and you want to know where these dolphins and what their role was in the redemption of the people of Israel,
it's me.
It's Rabbi Gellman's revelation.
Yes.
Well, thank you for joining us. Of course, following our Torah study this morning at 10 o'clock, we have prayers from Valley Beth Shalom. Rabbi Avi is going to be leading service this morning, a bar mitzvah of a wonderful young man, of Dean Collins. And tonight at 5 o'clock, Yossi Dresner, of course. Tomorrow, Sunday, 8:30 in the morning and 5 o'clock in the evening, I'll be doing Minyan online, just online, not in person, Facebook and YouTube. And all week will be in person as well as online and Facebook and YouTube at 7:30 in the morning and 5 in the evening. This coming Wednesday night, we begin the next semester of the VBS College of Jewish Studies. Because of the Omicron virus, we're going to be doing this session and probably next week's session also online, just virtually. You can sign on to the Zoom by going onto the VBS website or join us on Facebook and YouTube. And we'd be delighted to have you with us. Our theme this year is going to be Israel, but not the politics. We all have read about lots of the politics in the New York Times and the LA Times and the Jewish Journal and Jerusalem Post and Haaretz, but we'd like to do simply the Israel that's not part of the politics, the culture of Israel. It's music, it's literature, it's art, it's film, it's dance, it's food, because it's important for those of us who love Israel to love that part of Israel too, to understand it and to understand how the lives of Israelis are different than our lives and how they are the same. So join us, please. Wednesday night, our guest will be Professor Melissa Weininger of CSUN, our new Jewish Studies professor at CSUN, who will give us an introduction to the cultural streams that form Israeli culture. We really look forward to having you 7 o'clock Wednesday night. Take good care this week. Stay well. Take care of yourselves. And we'll see you next Shabbos.